Hi, I'm Mike James, and you're listening to the Functional Tennis Podcast.
Welcome to episode 42 of the Functional Tennis Podcast. I'm Fabio Molly, your host. I'd like to say I hope you're all safe out there and healthy, and that you're getting some fresh air and exercise in during this isolation period. This week, we speak to strategy coach and tennis data analytics expert, Mike James. Mike tells us all about data in tennis, analytics, how it works in the senior game, in juniors, and it's a really interesting episode. My background, my university degree is in software engineering, so I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with technology, data, coding. So for me, this was a really interesting guest to have on the show. I asked him some great questions. Well, I thought they were great, but I really think you're going to enjoy this podcast. It's something a bit different, but it's really where tennis is moving forward. More data, more research into numbers, and yeah, I think you'll learn something. So I hope you enjoy the show. After you finish listening to the episode, I'd appreciate if you could open up your podcast app and leave us a review. We're trying to grow our reviews on the podcast, and every review we get makes a big difference. So I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. Okay, let's listen to Mike. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the Functional Tennis Podcast.
Fabio, thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. Can't wait to find out about your great work. But first of all, tell me, how are you dealing with the current situation?
Well, taking one day at a time. I think every day at the moment feels like a month. First and foremost, I'm healthy. My family's healthy. And from a tennis tour point of view, obviously the tour's officially now been suspended until June the 8th. I think the reality is it's probably going to be a lot further ahead before we get any tennis played this year. And I think it's an evolving situation currently. So every day there seems to be a little bit of new information coming out there about what potentially could happen, what the calendar could look like, tournaments, moving venues, even one tournament talking about moving to a different country. So I don't know what they would call that tournament. So yeah, one day at a time, but trying to stay positive and using this time to learn. I think that's so important at the moment. While I have a lot of time on my hands, trying to learn and make a better version of myself for when we come out of this situation.
Tell me, that's not Wimbledon trying to change country down to Australia, is it?
So I heard Rome were talking about they were happy to change country and change surface, which made me think, well, it's not the Foro Italico anymore. So it was a bit of an interesting comment from them, and the positivity I like. But once we start doing that, it's going to be a crazy calendar.
Yeah, I don't know when the tennis season is going to be back. I don't want to say because I have no idea, but I don't think it's going to be June, especially if things ramp up in the States. And I still think in the UK, it's going to get pretty serious over there. I did see that this won't air for a few weeks, but Mr. Boris came down with COVID himself, which is not good. But yeah, I don't know. I'd say it'd be at least September if we're lucky, is my opinion. But look, hopefully it's sooner than that and things go back to normal.
Absolutely. And I think what could be exciting for tennis fans is obviously the French Open moved to the last week of September, first week of October. And can you imagine if we had, 2 Grand Slams, Masters Series, and an absolutely packed calendar from September and no off-season, and gave the tennis fans week in, week out coverage? I think that's everybody, including the players, would be happy because they could earn money. And I think that's very important in this time. Tennis is different to a team sport, soccer, rugby union, whereas the tennis players are only earning when they're playing. So if they're not playing, it's going to be a tough road ahead for some players.
Oh, no, definitely. Life is going to be really tough for them. I see even the soccer players, I know they earn atrocious amounts of money, but the likes of Barcelona are looking at 70% wage cuts. A lot of the UK teams, wage cuts. So, yeah, I think there's going to be wage cuts for everybody. It's only fair and in order to keep businesses running. But tell me, what are you learning? So what's your plans for the next few weeks or months? Any interesting tennis topics that you're going to be learning?
Yeah, I think the plan for me at the moment is I'm looking to create a lot of online content for people out there to view and to look at. I think I've been fortunate enough now to work with a couple of top 100 players on the men's side, some good doubles players, and I have a lot of information sat on my computers, match reports, videos, of matches, maybe 300 or 400 matches now, I think, professional matches. So I want to use this time and utilize this time to actually create really good quality content for people to view and look at and give information that I've been taking on board and passing it on to people.
I look forward to seeing some of that. You'll have enough time to work on it, I hope. But Mike, let's tell everybody, what exactly is your job title, job role? I know we discussed it beforehand and you say your job is about getting the job done, but what exactly is the job that you're a specialist in?
Yeah, so I think if we go back a little bit, first and foremost, I'm a tennis coach. I've been operating as a tennis coach for 18 years. I like to describe my journey as tots to tour. So I started right at the development end of the game in tennis clubs, working with juniors, adults, and working my way through to being head coaches of some academies in the Midlands and up north in the UK. Eventually, when I, if you like, broke into starting working with professional players, I didn't play professional tennis. So I was looking at a tool, at something that I could hang my hat on, that I could get the message over to tennis players that are playing professional tennis. So that tool was video analysis to begin with. And then I started to move into recording matches, match tagging from Dartfish, and then building match reports and custom made key performance indicators that I felt were important. And eventually now, essentially my full-time role for this season has been working with Team Kecmanovic, Miomir Kecmanovic and the team, Mira Havatan and the team there. And essentially, I suppose if you were to pin me down to say what is my job title, I would describe myself as a strategy coach or a data analyst. So it's a bit of both, really. My tool is numbers and video, but ultimately I'm using that from a coach's background.
Interesting, very interesting. And tell me, what would be a day for you? So I know we're sort of, the day now is completely different, but a normal, you're with team, you're with Miomir's team. What does a typical practice day look like for you?
Brilliant question. And I think, again, I've been on both sides of the fence as a traveling coach for the last 5 years. Obviously, my role now looks totally different. So the first and foremost, which is a positive, is the fact that my role generally is quite remote. So I can work from home. As long as I have Wi-Fi and I have the computer fully charged, I can work from home, which is a massive plus point because I've just had my first child. She's 6 weeks old now. So thank you. She's keeping me busy at the moment. So essentially what I'm in a day in, day out would be with Misha, we call him Misha, is that I would be looking at, if he's playing a tournament, I would be scouting his potential opponents, giving feedback and content to the team about what I'm looking at for the opponents, and also looking at his game and looking at the development and the numbers and breaking everything down to basically help the development of one, him as a player, and then two, helping them on the match court.
Okay, so there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there is.
First of all, how do you scout a player? So Miomir is playing Karina Busta tomorrow. So what does your scouting job involve there?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a better example. So I was at the Doha 250 back in January. His first round was against Jordan Thompson, and that was scheduled, I believe, that was the night match on the Monday. The draw came out Saturday at 6 p.m. So unlike the rest of the team, as soon as the draw comes out at 6 p.m. on Saturday, I'm back in the hotel room and I'm match tagging. I'm collecting the data that I already have on Jordan Thompson, and I'm putting together a scouting report for the team to view on the Sunday morning. So then on the practice court for Sunday and Monday morning, they can have a good idea of what they expect on Monday, and they have just adds to their game plan, basically. So the key part is the scouting report. So I compile match report data, video content, and then break it all down into some video highlights, some very simple video highlights of effective strategy from what Misha could do to the opponent, but also what I feel the opponent is very, very good at as well. So to show their strengths. And then in the scouting report, email it over, have a little team discussion, and then my job is done for Monday. But I'm also then looking for the second round opponent. So I'm already, it's not a day off on Sunday for me or Monday. Those 2 days, I'm actually already working on the second round opponent.
And do you have all the video and storage and the information? Where do you get that information from?
Yeah, brilliant. So essentially, we collect the video, and we have collected the video now for the last 18 months. I set up an analytics company beginning of last year, Eye Analytics, and I have a great team of analysts that are working with me now that are coding matches, tagging matches at WTA, ATP, doubles and singles, because ultimately we need the data and the video to be able to do our job quickly, because obviously if we don't have video and data, it's a slow process because you can't get around physically having to watch the match back and tag the match. So obviously it takes time. And you want our sort of KPIs of at least 4 matches from the player has played previously. And we look, let's say Misha has not played that player. So we look for similar game styles and similar surfaces and conditions. Of course, you cannot get it perfect. It's always better if Misha has played the player before, and also if he's played them multiple times, because then you have more of a blueprint, going into that match. Of course, things can change. Tennis is not a video game. Things can change, but tennis subconsciously is a game of repeatable patterns, and patterns happen over and over again. And you cannot see that watching the match live. You can see that when you break the match down. So you might see a player hitting 8 forehand winners down the line. Okay. But when do they do that in the match? What is the score? There's all these different permutives that make the situation important or less important, if that makes sense. So, we have to go down a route sometimes where, what do we hang our hat on today for this player and this game style and these conditions? And that changes from match to match, tournament to tournament, because tennis isn't played on different surfaces, different balls, different conditions, different game styles. So it's a really tough sport to do this in. If you think about soccer, rugby, NFL, they've been doing scouting and analytics and this sort of stuff for many, many years. Tennis, it's just starting to happen. It's not foolproof yet. It still needs a lot of work, but it does make a difference.
I can only imagine it does make a difference. How many players actually in the top 100 do you reckon have a data analyst or strategy coach?
Well, it's a really interesting one, because we know some guys out there that are well known that are doing it. There are some guys that are hidden away in rooms that the player pays a salary to, that the player never credits. And then there's some guys like me that are in between. I've worked with some players that I can't talk about, and some players that I can talk about. So it's an interesting one for tennis, because in soccer, for example, everybody's very aware that, like Liverpool, for example, I think they've been having live analytics delivered to Jurgen Klopp this season. He's been literally getting information up in the box this season. I don't know how common that is in soccer, but I read that report and was like, yeah, that makes total sense. Why wouldn't you do that? Where you can change tactics, minute by minute. In tennis, it seems to be a growing trend of people being open, that they're using data, they're using strategy support and video.
Okay. Well, the most famous one I know is Craig O'Shaughnessy.
Yes, sure. Yeah, I obviously worked with Novak. He was with Berrettini back end of last year. And Craig's probably the pioneer for this. And he's definitely been an inspiration for me. And I think for me, the job I am doing is the job that the head coach could do. It's just a matter of time. The head coach has so many different things to focus on for the player, taking care of the player's schedule, on-court content, getting them mentally in the right frame of mind. So I'm just coming in and cutting away time and giving them information that they can dissect extremely quickly, and they can get on with everything very well.
I know matches, the length of a match is like a piece of string. It could be an hour, it could be 4 or 5 hours. But on average, let's say a 90-minute match, so two tight sets. How long would that take to tag?
Myself, I'd like to think I'm pretty competent of doing it now. And the guys that we've we've got working for Sporteye, they are, if the match is 2 hours, they're taking 2 hours to code the match. So we're fortunate that there's a lot of performance analysis degrees in the UK universities, and we've been picking up some great analysts coming out of university that have studied a degree in performance analysis. So we've really got a high level of coders, of taggers, operating for us at the moment, which is great.
And do you just have some software that the video runs through, and as the play happens, tag?
Yeah, so we're using Dartfish. Dartfish around eight or 9 years ago now came up with a tagging panel. The beauty with Dartfish, and I'm selling Dartfish a lot here, but is that the tagging panel is totally custom made. So you could get two different analysts jumping on Dartfish, and their tagging panels look slightly different because it's totally a blank canvas when you start with it. So I'd like to think the tagging panel I've got at the moment is pretty robust and pretty competent. And I've been fortunate enough to, back end of 2018, I worked with Magnus Norman and helped him out with his pre-season content with Stan, and then helped them through 2019 a little bit for scouting and picking Magnus's brains, picking Miro's brains, other top coaches. I'd like to think that what we are doing is at the top of the sport.
You were working with Magnus there for Stan Wawrinka. You just said Stan. Yeah. Okay, great. And you were doing the same sort of work for him, was it?
No, I mean, with Magnus, it was a bit of a support mechanism. What he was looking for was Stan was coming back from his knee injury. I believe, I want to say June 18, he came back from his knee injury. And Magnus, initially, we met at the US Open through Claudio Pistolesi, who's another great coach. I'd like to talk about him later for sure. And basically Magnus said, look, can you look at Stan's game before his knee injury and after his knee injury, and can you find any things that are different? And I flew to Magnus's academy in Stockholm in November of 2018 and was, to say the least, was pretty nervous sitting in his academy, in his boardroom, presenting about his player that's won 3 Grand Slams and one of the best players in the last 15 years, and showing him what the differences were. And I've got to say, he was amazing and really made me feel comfortable in presenting the information.
And tell me, are you allowed to say what differences you found?
I think, though, generically I will do. I think there was elements of court position changes, things on return and things on serve. They were the 3 main areas which gave Magnus and the team a boost going into the pre-season and some confidence. So again, I took lots and lots of data, lots and lots of matches, and I will create videos of positive, if you like, and let's say negative videos, so the player can visually see. And I think I've now been specializing in video and numbers and strategy, particularly the last 3 years. And the player, they almost never want to see the match report. Our match reports are 22 pages worth of information. What they do want to see is the video. They want to see the video. They want to go, show me my court position on the final shot. Show me, am I blocking or driving the return? Where is it landing? What's my situation in ball 4? How effective is my wide serve on the deuce? So, the player just wants to see the video and see the proof, if you like. But that gives them the boost themselves, and gives the whole team a lift sometimes.
I can only imagine having access to this information is unbelievable. And tell me, I am aware of a couple of companies out there, I don't know their names now offhand, but where they sell information, they sell match information. What is the difference to those guys and your company? Is their information more generic?
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about companies like, can I say the company's name? You're talking about the ones on TV that you see the graphs, Hawkeye?
I'm not sure the company name now, but you can say it far away, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a good question. So WTA have the SAP, the SAP login where they see the data and information, which is really, really good. And the ATP have the Hawkeye reports, which the players can either buy, under the Masters 1000 level, or then is posted on the player zone. So the match reports that the players get are very robust. They are in some ways more detailed than ours because Hawkeye, for example, is a laser system. So it's recording like ball speed, ball flight path, the height of the ball, things that we cannot do as a human, but it's not connected to the video. So the players they get the match report and they can't link it to the video. That's the big thing for what we are doing. We're taking everything that our match reports are showing the player. They can literally dive into the match and click on, last shot, forehand down the line, and they can see how many times they did it. They can see how effective they were, how many points they won. Did it set them up in a good situation? Was it the right choice of shot? They can go into that side of things. And that's the key part of it, really. Just the data and just seeing numbers on a screen at the end of a set can be very, very misleading unless you see the video.
That's a good point you make there. But maybe it's not those companies it's not the main companies you mentioned. It's other companies who they would buy that information from, let's say, Hawkeye, and then they put the video on it and then they sell it to the players. That's from what I gathered. That's what it was. Now, you may know more than this than me.
Yeah, there are other analytics companies out there. There's some great companies out there that are working with professional players. Everyone's doing their own thing. Everyone's a little bit secretive, if I'm honest, at the moment. Again, the industry in this area is still very primitive within tennis, and I can only see it growing. I think if you look at the NextGen finals, I think from my point of view, that is great for tennis to have, for the player to have the live stats on there, for the coaches, for the coaching team to have the live stats to be able to be up to date with the court position and all the percentages. But what I really like with the ATP Cup, they took it a stage further and had the strategy room where they could get the team in a room, filter all of the information and go through. Essentially what I saw on the ATP Cup is what I am doing individually with players. They had the filter system, they had the video, the numbers, and they were in there and they were reviewing the matches, and then they were building and looking and scouting opponents.
Okay. Do you feel your job in jeopardy ever when you see the ATP are taking that side of things to a new level where it's all in-house and the players can go directly there?
That's a great question. I never thought of it too much like that. What I would say is, if you're talking about some companies that are providing the information for WTA, ATP, they are still, people don't realize this, they see the graphs on the TV and it looks very fancy, but they're still 50% human coded. So the laser system that's on the court, on the pro court, is obviously taking ball speeds, it's taking flight paths, these sort of things. But there's still 50% of the data that a human is doing in the box live at the stadium. So the point in that is, if a player plays in Indian Wells, he's having, John, the analyst for the company, coding 50% of his match, and he goes to Indian Wells and he's got a totally different analyst coding at Indian Wells. And that interpretation of the data now is going to be already skewed. So the reason when I come in, I'm working with top 100 players, they know they're getting me coding the matches and physically inputting the data. And I think that's probably where I'm different to everybody else. I'm not getting other people doing the coding. I'm doing it myself. And it's giving, my KPIs are my KPIs. So rightly or wrongly, what I'm standing for in different situations, but it's consistent. And that's the most important thing. You put in bad data, you get out bad data. So it's got to be consistent. That's really, really important.
That was the next question I was actually lining up for you, was like the inconsistencies with different people tagging matches. So, what is an unforced error? What's a forced error? There's different opinions of that. And you can see match stats, which we've seen on TV, which haven't made sense really. Like, there's been no unforced errors some days. Well, they were seen, but when somebody else tagged it, there was 6 unforced errors. So it's hard to get it right. So that consistency, yes, does make a big difference, especially at the margins that these players play at.
Absolutely. I remember watching a player that I was potentially working with in US Open qualies last year. And at the end of the match, it said that both players hit 0 winners. And I knew that. I watched the match live, so I knew that wasn't the case. But obviously, if you're a fan and you're logging onto your app and you see, crikey, there's no winners there, and then maybe you screenshot it, you post it on Twitter, and then somebody else takes it, and it can all of a sudden become this match had no winners, and there's a bit of a story, and that's not true. So, but ultimately, at some point, whether it happens in 2 weeks or 2 years or 20 years, it will all be automated. Computers will work out smart court technology. There's a massive amount of investment in smart court technology at the moment. And the holy grail, and nobody's yet got that, is to be able to, it's a bit like if you imagine the laser on a self-driving car when they pick up the pedestrian walking out of the road and the car brakes. The laser on the car sees the human form and knows the distance. You need the smart court technology to eventually be able to pick up, is the player, how much time does the player have in between contact to contact? How stressed are they physically? Are they on the full run? Are they set? Do they have time? So the smart court technology at the moment doesn't have all of those things. So that's why it's still best to have humans committing to that and seeing those different things. Is the player in attack, neutral, and defense? Is it a forced error or unforced error? So I'll give you an example. When I started coding Stan's matches for when I met with Magnus, when I'd previously coded on ball 3, the player in defense, if players that I was working with at Futures and Challengers level were going backwards after ball 3, and they were really going backwards, they're always in defense. They didn't have the quality to get out of that shot. Stan can be going backwards, full defense, and still produce a forced error on the other side of the net, So you have to know the level that you're working with and get used to, okay, this is the level I'm now coding and this is what I'm seeing. And then there's always another level where, Misha's last match was against Nadal, and I'd never actually coded anything of Nadal up until that point because none of the players I was working with at Face Rafa, the guy is superhuman. The guy is doing stuff that is like a video game. If you look at the ATP Tour highlight reel for Rafa's last match in Acapulco against, not his last match, but against Misha, it's 3 minutes of highlight reels of shots where he's playing the ball behind him on the full stretch, down the line, everything. It's just crazy. So, but that's not happening at challenger level, I can tell you that.
Yeah, but they won't be there if it is. They won't be there long.
Absolutely.
So tell me, that stuff's not happening at challenge level, but what should players be looking out for in stats? Let's say not the top 100 guys, players below that level. If you were to work with them, what is it you're going to say that's really important with them to help them break through?
Brilliant question. First of all, obviously, hypothetically speaking, the things that I'm seeing that are different is the ability to serve accurate, close to the lines, or powerful. What is the player doing regards to the serve? What is the player doing on the amount of returns in play? I tend to see the lower the levels, the less returns in play are happening on first serve particularly. Court position is hugely important. And, famously, it's been talked about 70% of the matches 0-4. The numbers I get out with my players, it's very rarely 70% that I'm seeing with the players that I'm working with, unless they're playing a John Isner, Struff, a Kevin Anderson. I'm seeing 70% plus. But, there's about a 10% difference, let's say, on that one. But ball 3 and ball 4 is still massively important because the match is won or lost in the 0-4 zone. So, how passive or creative is the player on ball 3, ball 4? What situation are they in? Are they in a situation where they can dominate the rally after that or finish the rally on ball 3 or ball 4? It's a bit of a tough question to answer without having the player, the case study in front of me. What I like, what I'm doing, and how I'm presenting with players that I work with when I work with an academy, when I work with an individual, is I'm very keen on sitting down with a conditioning coach, the psychologist, the head coach, the physio, and coming together and having an holistic approach. And I want to know what the conditioning coach's thoughts are on the player's movement and how I can help them with looking for different situations in movement that I can exploit and show the conditioning coach to then feed back to the player. Or, in between the points, creating highlights of the body language of the player, the positive or negative self-talk. So for me, it's not just about numbers and video, which I talked about earlier. It's about bringing the team together, and we're in 2020 now. So even as we're getting lower down the ladder, the top players that are playing challenger, if you like, the top players that are playing doubles, juniors, they are starting to create teams around them. And it's so important, that communication. I can't stress that enough. So with my role, even though, Misha knows I'm in the team and Ante Pavic knows I'm in the team, the doubles player, my goal and job is to put everything and run all the information through the head coach, the conditioning coach, psychologist, whoever's in the team. I'm not going direct to the player, because if I start doing that, you're going to get a breakdown of communication, and the relationship and the information, particular information, is not going to be passed on in the best possible way, because the head coach is with that player every single day. So that the head coach is going to know the best way to communicate the information that I'm presenting.
Yeah, no, look, that makes sense. It's a bit like a business as well. I know people need to talk, but all the information will go through the team leader. I never know if the team leader is the player or the coach. You never know which one that is. Yeah, that's important. But a question, do you tag any junior matches?
So our junior data at the moment is limited. We are tagging juniors at Tennis Europe's and ITFs. I'm really excited about delving into junior development and looking at the correlation between the junior development and the senior information. The information that's limited at the moment that's available, the numbers are not changing that much. What I am interested in is because again, the 0 to 4, 5 to 8 plus 9 gets chucked around so much now, it's been lost in translation and people are confused about it. So what I'm interested in is the stress levels of players and what happens to the rally zones, court positions, ball speeds, decision makings when stress gets put into, the match. So what I mean by that is what happens at break point. Does the average rally length go up when you're facing break points? What's your decision making like when you're at 30 all, 4 all? And these things, from a professional point of view, I'm getting a good amount of information. The juniors I'm fascinated with, because in baseball, I don't know whether you ever, Fabio, watched the film Moneyball.
I have watched bits of it. I haven't watched it all now, but I've heard great things about it.
Yeah. So essentially that was, the guy got in a data analyst. I can't remember the date. I think it's 2003, 4. And they put together from data all the rejects, if you like, from the draft, and they made a very good team, and they punched above their weight. But what baseball are doing now in the last 5 years, they're taking the data and they're delving into junior development, and they're trying to predict and plan the draft 5 or 6 years ahead, whereas they were not doing that before. And I think in tennis, I really am interested in doing that. Of course, it has to be done ethically and correctly and not to scare people off. And I still think, as I said before, the tennis community is not ready for massive amount of information yet and not understanding it. And it's still very new. But I think, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to steepen the learning curve for 14, 15-year-olds and keep them on the right path? For, because that you've got video and data to back it up of what happens in the match, so I think it's really, really interesting, the junior side of it.
I think it can make a massive advantage for them, but it must come down to a cost as well. There's not that much money in the junior game. There's not that much in the senior game if you're outside the top 100. But for the juniors, I'm sure is it going to be a case of the rich have access to all this information, which aren't normally the best players?
I mean, my opinion, and I'd love someone to do this, and I don't know how you would do this, but if you look at, again, I go back to football or soccer. If you look at the Premier League table, it's virtually like for like on money spent and position finished in the league table. So Manchester City spend the most money, they finish first. Okay? Maybe not this season, but that's a different story. In tennis, I believe the same. I believe when the player is having a heavy amount of investment, whether that's from the family, private sponsor, academy, federation, they have a better chance of making it. It's as simple as that. The more money invested in the player, the better chance they have of reaching their goals, their ranking, and making it in an exclamation mark of whatever you define as making it. But I believe I'd love to see the top 100 rankings today and someone to find about the budgets that these players had from wherever the money came from, and to see how close it correlates to ranking. That would be an amazing study.
Well, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. I don't know how to best describe it, but obviously the better you do, then the more money you have to spend on these things. So
good point.
That advantage gets bigger and bigger. So it's whether you can get a bit of a kickstart. All of a sudden you're 200 in the world, but you can travel with a physio, a strength coach, and then you can get a bit of work with you. All of a sudden you have that advantage from early on, but most of people who with those services don't get them until they're top 80, top 60, top 50. Obviously, I'm sure the likes of Federer, Novak, Andy Murray, Nadal, they had those from a bit beforehand, but they rose so quick, they didn't even see this happening.
You're absolutely right, Fabio. And I think there's no getting around tennis costs a lot of money. I think it's $40,000 for the player to do a full schedule in costs. So you add on a coach, Well, it's virtually the same cost for the coach. So there's another $40,000. That's before paying them a penny in wages. So the unfortunate thing, if you look at any individual sport, you look at horse riding, gymnastics, golf, tennis, boxing, they're expensive. Okay, there's all relative. Boxing maybe is not as expensive as tennis, but particularly let's take tennis and golf. To make money, you can't just play in your own country. You have to travel the globe. Hey, now maybe in this current situation, maybe the tours have to look at a golf style European tour, Asia tour, American tour moving forwards to survive in the next couple of years. That's just my opinion. But, there's no getting around. It does take massive investment. And I've, got countless stories of people remortgaging homes, selling cars, doing what they need to do to fund tournament travel and trips. And unfortunately, that is the sport. Whereas in soccer, you get signed by a Premier League team at 11 and 12 and the family can literally sit back and relax as long as the son or daughter is producing the goods because everything is paid for them.
Yeah, no, the soccer's a totally different ball game. So many players doing well out of soccer.
Absolutely.
That some young kids doing really well where even they may not get paid a lot at the start, but then their parents are sorted out with jobs or they're relocated to a nice new house in the new city that they're in. So yes, soccer's just a different ball game completely. But no, that information is really interesting and it's good to see tennis from that angle. I think that you're doing a great job there.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Fabio. And I think what I'm excited about with this is that we are nowhere near the pinnacle of using video and data yet in tennis. I think that's for sure. If you look at something like NFL, that has been using data massively for years and years and years. And again, I'll go back to the next gen. Some of the players were wearing the Catapult heart monitors. I think there's a lot of devices, and that device particularly will be great for knowing the micro steps and the heat maps of the players of what they're moving on the court, the energy they're expending in calories, their sweat rates. There's so many things moving forward with sports science and technology that is going to come into tennis. And some people are scared of that because they like the way tennis is. But I would embrace that because ultimately people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So the idea of the next gen format, which is obviously the Fast 4 format, I think is going to come in. I think tennis is going to be a little bit more like the cricket where you got in, the one-day internationals, the IPL, this sort of stuff. I can see that happening in tennis for sure in the next 5 to 10 years because you can watch a next-gen match and they've played, best of 5 sets to 4, but it's been an hour 25. And for the new modern generation, that's that attention span they can accept. They can't accept John Isner, Nicholas Mahou, 11 and a half hours.
No, definitely not. But I would, speaking of all your stats there, I'd love to get a breakdown on the Wimbledon final last year when Federer had his opportunity. I'd love to get the heart rates of both players there and compare it and see exactly, because I think for me, that's one thing that's missing on TV. I think it's up to the TV companies. Now this information, this rich data is available. I think they should be displaying it much better. They should have people, Amazon have the best commentators, some great commentators working there, and they should be able to interpret it really well and then show some nice graphics of deeper down, some trends going on. But for me, the one thing I always wanted was heart rate on the players. You can tell exactly what's going on. Like all of a sudden he's match point up, the heart rate's at like 170 or you can say, okay, it's Rafa or it's Novak probably. He's 3 match points down. He's shown like 95 beats per minute there. But I know there's GDPR issues and all these privacy issues. So that's another problem.
Absolutely. But I think that's going back to what we were talking about earlier with the stress levels related to score. When you see coaches talking about pre-point routine, post-point routine, and talking about breathing control, ultimately the breathing control is to do what? It's to calm the player down. How is the player going to get calm with controlling their breathing? Their heart rate's going to go down. So you're absolutely right. I mean, what a tool that would be for a coach to see, is their breathing control and their routines actually working? And that would be a big data plus point.
Yeah, no, I agree that they're really important. And to the experience, obviously, if you've been down there before, down match points against Federer before, you've come out of it. So I think you're going to be just a little bit more relaxed. Or even if you've won, it's like all the guys talk about winning, entering the top 100. That last match to enter the top 100 can take a while because there's so much pressure on themselves to break through. And then all of a sudden you do it once, and then the next, obviously you're in the top 100. It's a lot easier then. So there's all these, it comes down to experience helps reduce the heart rate, probably until you get really old then. And then you figure out it's your last chance. And you're like, no, I've been here a load of times. I know this might not happen again. And the heart rate's back up. So
that's great. If we used these heart rate monitors for recreational tennis players as well, that was. But I think the thing is, with whatever you see in professional tennis, eventually it filters down to the junior game and to recreational game. So we're the only sport at the moment that doesn't allow on-court coaching. I'm talking about men's game particularly, and there's been a huge debate in the men's game of how that is produced. And again, I love the NextGen setup, the headset. Listen to the player talk. I know last year they were told that they had to speak in English. Some of the players basically ignored that advice and carried on in their own language, but most of them adhered to it. And what an amazing spectacle for the fans and the TV audience to be able to witness that heated conversation and how much the coaches can get across and what the players thinking. I know Federer's comments about that was, he wasn't a fan of that happening because he said, well, I want the best team in the world to tell me advice and information, and I don't want sharing it with everybody else, which I get. I understand that. But I think for the spectator sport and being fan friendly, I think it has to come in, that sort of thing.
But Federer, he doesn't have to say anything during the match. Obviously, nothing said at the moment, so nothing has to change for him. He can say, okay, well, I'm not into this. I don't need, we do a pre-match plan. I have my backup plan, and that's it. So I think, yes, it's great. It'd be great to have. And if you don't like it, you just don't say anything. And that's the end of that. And you'll probably learn from the other guys then what's going on, because Federer, I'm sure he's probably more intelligent than most of the players out there. And when things don't go his way, when things change, he can probably realize why they're changing. They're just out of his control. But some players maybe don't know why a certain point in a match something changed. The other player changed tactic and they can't really see it. So that's why it's good to have this information.
Absolutely. And I think not every player wants this information. Not every player buys into this information. I think I'm very comfortable with that. What I do say is the next generation of players, and I don't just mean the next gen final players, but the players that are coming through, like Misha, he was born 99. He's very interested in numbers, data, video. Look at the next generation. They are all on their phones so much, when you're traveling with juniors or trips in between tournaments, they are on the phone, the social media. So why not interact with them that way, where you interact with them remotely and you can capture their attention, I think, better with video and numbers moving forward. So I think the next generation is going to be using this a lot more because they want to.
And tell me, quick question before this be the last question. You mentioned Catapult, and Catapult is a GPS tracking system. It's a bit like, there's a few companies actually in Ireland that do this. Stat Sports is one of them. And the Stat Sports ones are used by all the rugby teams, Barcelona, a lot of football teams. But I went to buy a kit off one of them. I'm not sure which company before they did more. As you say, this technology has come down to now the amateur players can use it. But for tennis, it wasn't friendly, mainly because it would only calculate outdoor. It wouldn't work indoors. One, are all the systems like that? And two, if you buy Catapult, which you can buy, I think it's about £150 to buy a Catapult, which isn't that expensive in the grand scheme of things. And will that work indoor and outdoor? And is it advantageous for a junior to go out and buy a kit? Can he learn anything from that?
Okay. Amazing question. And first of all, can I confirm I do not know, my knowledge on Catapult is limited. What I do know is Catapult is striving for exactly what you just said, to be able to pick up the small micro movements of players. If you think of a soccer player, they're sprinting a lot and they're sprinting in longer distances and changing direction less than tennis players. So that's been the holy grail. I believe Catapult have solved it. Please don't quote me on that, but I believe they solved it because they were using it at the NextGen finals back in November for the first time. And I've got a couple of friends that have been testing their software, and I think they either solved it or they are very close to solving it. But again, like you say, all these companies are fighting for that to be the first ones to land on the moon, if you like.
Yeah, no, I think it's a hot area right now. And I used to have some friends who play five-a-side and they'd have their Apple Watch out and they were like, today I ran like 8 kilometers playing five-a-side in an hour. And I'm like, no, you did not. The GPS trackers in these devices are not made for sharp movements. They're made more for broader linear activities, and the information they got was all wrong. So I always want to get my own Catapult, let's say, and do it properly now. I stopped playing soccer a while ago, so I never got around to it. But I think if you get a device for tennis, it would be amazing.
Absolutely. I think, the wave is coming, whether we like it or not. I'm not talking about coronavirus there. I'm talking about smart court technology, and wearable technology is inevitable in tennis in the next 5 years. But I'm super excited about that. I think it's going to take the sport. We talk about Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, Murray, Stan. Tennis can't get any better than what they're playing. I believe that's not true. I believe we will see higher levels in the future because of this technology.
Yeah, well, hopefully. Maybe Andy Murray's the man to ask. He's been wearing those vests for a couple of years now, so he's probably testing. Mike, thank you very much for jumping on the show. I learned loads there, which is great. So hopefully our listeners picked up a lot. Tell me, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so you can find me online. Please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter at Mike James Sports. And my analytics company is Sporteye with 3 Eyes Analytics. So please feel free to follow us and contact me. I'm always interested in conversations with the wider tennis community.
Great, Mike. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Fabio. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed that episode. I was intrigued by all the data analytics stuff and I thought it was really interesting. So thank you very much, Mike. I'll be back next week with another podcast episode. And until then, keep safe, guys. Try to get some fresh air and a little bit of exercise in. Bye.